Hey all, I've gotten a new computer, a new camera, a built-in microphone, so we'll see how this works. Should be good. Um, just checking in with you guys. What I thought I would do here is kind of a 30-day check on the coming election, and I think it's November 5th. So I thought I'd do one of those State of the Race videos. All right. So in some ways, right, the race really hasn't changed since my first video about this. In other ways, we've gotten some clarification. All right. So what do we know right now at the top of the ticket, the presidential race? It appears to be just about a dead heat, slight edge to Harris, which I think is what I said before. So that hasn't really changed. Slight edge to Harris, but it's pretty close to a coin flip right now. And I think that's about where we'll be on November 4th. It's going to come down to 7 swing states. Right? The recent addition to that list is North Carolina, which is now 50-50. Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Boom, 7. Right, those 7. Those are the only ones that matter. All the other states don't really matter because we can already predict how they're going to go. We do have an unusual situation in Nebraska, right? Because they don't do winner take all with their electoral college delegates. Whoever wins the statewide popular vote gets their 2 delegates, right, that are assigned to them because they have 2 senators. I think they might get 2 additional seats based on congressional districts. And one of those congressional districts is based in Omaha. And looks like Harris will win that by a pretty good margin. So she'll pick up 1 delegate from Nebraska, right? Which if it was winner take all, obviously Trump would get all the delegates because Nebraska as a whole, right, is going to go heavily for Trump. But there is a so-called blue dot, right, centered on Omaha, more urban, that gives Harris the edge in getting 1 delegate. That might prove to be, a tie-breaking delegate potentially. Yeah, because remember, technically the college could go 269 to 269. It would go to the House. Each House delegation would get 1 vote from each state, and Trump would win under that scenario. So tie goes to Trump. So Harris, right, is trying to avoid a tie. And if she wins the blue wall states, which would be Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, she would still need the blue dot in Nebraska, which it looks like she'll get that. Whether she'll get the blue wall states is a completely different question. But that's one possible scenario. Obviously not likely, but you could definitely not rule it out. Republicans in Nebraska were trying to get that rule changed, and they failed. So, and then Maine, right, also doesn't do it winner take all. And they actually are going to go for Harris as a whole, but there is 1 congressional district that will go for Trump. So he'll get an extra delegate out of Maine. Every other state, right, is winner take all, plus the District of Columbia, winner take all. Maybe we should do it that way, and maybe we shouldn't, but that's how we do it. So that's why, right, those 7 swing states are so important. All 7 are very competitive, could totally go either way. Every other state, unless we get a landslide election, we can already predict how they're going to go. All right, so it comes down to 7. That's where all the campaign money is going. Damn near every dollar. By both campaigns and independent expenditures are all going to those 7 states, including Nevada. The ones that are more likely for Harris, but only by a small margin, would be Wisconsin and Michigan. I think she'll probably win Wisconsin and Michigan. Pennsylvania is 50-50. I think Trump will probably win Arizona. Probably Georgia, maybe. Nevada, maybe. Certainly Trump's a bit stronger in the South and Southwest. Harris is a bit stronger in the upper Midwest and Pennsylvania. But honestly, highly plausible scenario, if things break one way or the other in terms of turnout, because that's what we don't know, who's going to turn out, right? They are called, what are they called? Low propensity voters, which is a fancy political science term for those people who don't usually vote but sometimes do. As opposed to someone like me, high education, relatively high income, highly engaged in politics. I'm a high propensity voter. I'm a sure thing. But there's a lot of Americans, I'm sure you won't be surprised, some of you may be among that group, right, that are low propensity voters. They almost never vote in midterm elections and mostly or sometimes vote in presidential elections. But they're also inclined to say, the hell with it, for all sorts of reasons. So I'll say Trump is a bit more focused on low propensity voters. And if his low propensity voters, basically working class white men, if they turn out in big numbers, which they might, but we won't know until after the election, that lot of good that does us then. If his low propensity voters turn out in bigger numbers than we currently expect, he could win all 7 of those swing states. Totally plausible. Harris tends to be targeting increasingly high propensity voters, because increasingly the Democratic Party attracts people with high education and higher incomes. That's like a flip of not so long ago, right, when low education, low income voters mostly went for Democrats. I think low income still mostly votes Democratic, but increasingly low education voters vote for Trump. It's been a sort of a shift in the Republican Party. Will that outlive Trump himself? We'll see. But the Republican Party, right, in some ways has become more populist. That's super interesting to me as a political scientist. So she's focused more on high propensity voters and winning over independents. So it's somewhat different strategies by the two campaigns, and we'll see which model proves to be the more effective one. Could Harris win all 7? If Trump's low propensity voters don't turn out in adequate numbers? Absolutely, she could win all 7. So those are both plausible scenarios. But if either one wins all 7, it would still be by small margins. But if you win by a small margin, right, you get all the delegates. So it'll look like an electoral college landslide if that happens, but it won't really be a landslide. Right, the all or nothing exaggerates election outcomes. Because if you look at both 2016 and 2020, right, it looks like Trump won by a lot in 2016 and that Biden won by a lot in 2020, if you just look at the electoral college count. But that's simply not true. The data tell us that's not true. That both elections were super close in a handful of states. Biden ran the table on the 6 swing states in 2020. Trump won 5 out of 6 in 2016. He only lost Nevada. And North Carolina is a new addition to that list of swing states. Troubling for Trump, right, and Republicans, who historically have had a nice grip on North Carolina. But North Carolina is changing. It's becoming more high education, more tech, more geared towards higher education, more urban, and as a result, right, trending a little bit Democratic. Maybe enough to flip the state for the first time in a long time. I think the last time North Carolina went Democratic was probably 2008 for Barack Obama. Maybe 2012 for Barack Obama, right? It was quite popular, even among some Republicans. So that's how the presidential race looks right now. Those are my 2 cents. The polls are giving us, an accurate picture. It's going to be really close. Polls can give us probabilities, but not precise predictions. Right. So as long as we don't expect too much out of polling data, it can actually tell us quite a bit. Right. So it's also telling us, by the way, there's a big gender divide. Men are going to vote significantly for Trump. Women are going to vote significantly for Harris. It's almost like though they're going to cancel each other out. Hence the 50-50 election. I mean, it might be 55-45. That's what most models see right now, is a race that's 55-45. 55 for Harris, 45 for Trump. That doesn't mean the outcome will be 55% to 45%. Don't think that. It means that Harris's chances of winning are around 55%. Trump's chances of winning are about 45%. 45% is a high number. Okay, it's almost a coin flip. it will be pretty close, right, to if you flipped a coin 20 times. Let's see if I can get this right. That in 11 of those cases, it would turn up heads for Harris. And in 9 of those cases, it would turn up tails for Trump. Right? And so if you flip that coin once and it turns up tails, hardly surprising. Because if you did it 20 times, right, it'll be tails, let's say 9 times. So if you flip it only once and it turns up tails, yeah, that's not surprising. It's not surprising at all. Slightly more likely that it turns heads on the one flip, but only slightly. The U.S. Senate, Democrats will lose that seat in West Virginia. They will probably lose the seat in Montana. If they lose the seat in Montana, the Senate will go Republican, narrowly, 51-49. Although, there's an interesting race brewing in, dang it, I think it's in Nebraska. Yeah, it's in Nebraska. There's a Republican incumbent who's actually, it turns out, according to recent polling data, because that has been not very heavily polled, because Nebraska is not an interesting state politically. It's so reliably Republican. It's been lightly polled. But some polls have been coming out that show that someone who's running as an independent, is perhaps a little bit ahead of the Republican incumbent. Perhaps a little behind. But right in there, right in the thick of it. And I assume this independent would caucus with the Democrats if he or she were to be elected. So that would be shocking. And Republicans just came to realize this, and they're losing their minds. And they're pouring money into that race now. Probably the Republican incumbent is okay. It is Nebraska. And now Republicans are focused on it. Before they weren't. They thought it was a sure thing. Probably it stays Republican. But if that were to flip independent, which would mean Democratic, basically, woo! In other words, right, Republicans could get the seat in West Virginia. They will. They could get the seat in Montana. I think they will. But if they lose the seat in Nebraska, of all dang places, it will be a 50-50 Senate. Maybe that's appropriate given how divided we are right now. But, yeah. And under that scenario, right, it would be determinative in terms of who controls the Senate, who has won the White House. Right, so if Harris were to win and the Senate is 50-50, right, Tim Walz, as her vice president, would become the tie-breaking vote. Democrats would control the Senate. If Trump wins, right, his vice president, J.D. Vance, would cast a tie-breaking vote in a 50-50 Senate, and Republicans would control the Senate. So that's a little twist. We could definitely end up with a 50-50 Senate, and then it would matter who makes it to the White House. Yeah, and I would say, and it looks like all the other Democratic incumbents, who we thought some of them were at high risk, turns out maybe they're not, like Sherrod Brown in Ohio. He looks fine. That race in Arizona, Democrat looks fine, Gallego. Looks like Democrats are going to limit their losses here. Because they could have, it looked like at one point they might lose 3 or 4 of those races. Now it looks like they're going to lose, they're definitely losing one. They'll probably lose a second, but they might win that Nebraska seat. So that's made everything a little more interesting than we had anticipated. Yeah. Because that's going to matter, right? If Harris wins the White House and Republicans control the Senate because they win Montana and West Virginia and they hold the seat in Nebraska, then they're in a position, right, to block her nominees to the federal courts. If she wins and it's 50-50, she'll get most of her nominees through the Senate onto the federal courts. If Trump wins and it's 50-50, right, he'll get his people through onto the courts. And if Trump were to win and Democrats were to control 51 seats, how likely is that? I think that's impossible. I think the best Democrats can hope for is 50-50. I think. Yeah. No, 50-50 is the best they can hope for. I think. So if Trump were to be elected, probably Republicans would control the Senate. And he would get his people onto the federal courts. An outside chance, right, that Trump wins and Democrats control the Senate, but that's highly unlikely. All right. And it continues to be the case here in Nevada, where I said, right, Senate Democratic incumbents who we thought were at risk are really not at risk. Jackie Rosen is way ahead here in Nevada over Sam Brown. It'd be shocking if she were to lose that seat. All right. I think that what we got for you here, state legislative races here in Nevada, right? Democrats currently have strong majorities in both chambers. I don't think that's going to change. The best Democrats could hope for is that they get super majorities in both chambers, 2/3. I think that's pretty unlikely. Best case for Republicans is they prevent Democrats from getting 2/3 in both chambers. And that matters, right, because we have a Republican governor, Joe Lombardo. And if Democrats did get 2/3 in both chambers, they could potentially override Lombardo's likely vetoes that are coming up in the legislative session in early 2025. All right. I think that's what I got for you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me for a little bit. State of the race here, 2024. Take care.